Right. Good morning. So we will start with Lama Tsongkhapa Guru Yoga. Then Geshe will lead the way with refuge in bodhicitta as a way of correcting our motivation. I think that in between we might find a mandala offering. So fasten your seatbelt. From the heart of the sever of the 100 deities of the Shita on the peak of cloud resembling a clump of extremely white fresh curd, King of Dhamma, omniscient, lost and Drakpa, please come here together with your sons. In the sky before me on a line throne, lotus and moon, my perfect pure Guru smiles with delight. Supreme field of merit from a mind of faith, please provide for high eons your spirited teachings. Your holy mind is the intelligence that understands the full extent of objects to be known. Your holy speech, which is excellent explanation, is an ear ornament for those of good fortune. Your holy man is radiantly beautiful with glory renowned. To you are winnable to see him, remember, are prostrate. Pleasant drinking water, various flowers, fragrant incenses, light-scented waters, and so forth. Oceans of cloud-like offerings, both actually arranged and mentally emanated, I offer to you the supreme field of merit. Whatever non-virtue of body, speech, and mind, especially those opposite to the three vows that I've collected from beginning this time, I confess each and every one with fervent regret from my heart. You strove for much learning and practice in this degenerate age and made your freedoms and richnesses meaningful by abandoning the 8 worldly concerns. Savior, we sincerely rejoice in your extensive deeds. Perfect, pure, holy gurus from the billion clouds of wisdom and compassion in the sky of the Dhammakaya. Please let fall a rain of profound and extensive Dhamma upon the receptacle of those to be subdued exactly as they need. Now, whatever virtue I've collected, benefit the teachings and all transmigratory beings, and in particular may cause the essence of perfect pure loss and Drakpa's teachings to shine forever. Sashi Bhoki Joshi Meto Tamri Rabling Shi Nidegembadi Sangye Shindu Miteowa Hidokunamda Shin La Chupasho. By the merits of having offered this mandala to Lama Tsongkhapa and his 2 sons, may I, my family members, and all sentient beings be able to meet, practice, and actualize the teachings of the victorious one, Losang Drakpa, who had a morality of an eminently pure way of life, was courageous in extensive conduct of the sons of the victorious ones, and accomplished the yoga of 2 stages of supreme bliss and emptiness. Idang Guru Ratna Mandala Kandiyatayami. By the force of having fervently requested in this way, hollow beams of white light are emitted from the hearts of the perfect pure father and sons, and combining into one enter my crown. White nectar, the color of milk, flows from the opening of tube of white light, cleansing all my sicknesses, spirit harms, negative karmas, obscurations, and the imprints without exception. My body become as pure and clear as crystal. So we're going to go down to page 13 and recite the Mixima verse 3 times. Mi mete wete chen chen rezi, jime kimbe wangbo jampe yang, dupu molon chonze sanwe da, kan chen kebe tsugen tsonga pa, lo sandra be shavla sowa de. Mi mete wete chen chen rezi, jime kimbe wangbo jampe yang, dupu molon chonze sanwe da, kan chen kebe tsugen tsonga pa, lo sandra be shavla sowa de. Mi mete wete chen chen rezi, jime kimbe wangbo jampe yang, Dopo malu jomze sanwe da kanche kebe tsugen tsongapa lo sandra pe shala sowa.
Sangye chedan tsoji chonam la chancho bardu dali kyabsuch dagi chushi jebande dagi drola benche sangye druparasho. Sanje
Jodan
Jadan
Tsogi
Tsoji
Chonamla Chanchu Badu Dani Kyasuj Dagi Chishegi Beto Nagi Dola Penchi Sange Drubarasho
Sanje
Jodan
Jadan
Tsogi
Tsoji
Chonamla Chanchu Badu Dani Kyasuji Dagi Chishegi Beto Nagi Dola Penchi Sange Drubarasho
Kangi tuzi zone dawa tamche pambi chere tambi chun tenze kwadam jela changze lo. Good morning, everyone. The case meeting.
So, Geshe, so that you have a didgeridoo with you, could you play something for a minute? Thank you.
1 minute.
You can actually, if you want to come here, we have a camera here, and we have a few people that attend the teachings online. So it'd be nice if they see you as well. So you can probably kind of stand here. Yeah. Yeah, maybe come even closer. Maybe you can stand here if it's all right with you. Yeah, whatever works for you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Anzoda Lamrim share so the Sembaki Yung Chedros. Is a Sembaki Yung by Nakarchin and Tigorda.
So during this set of teachings, we have been studying a text that explains the steps of the path of enlightenment, called in Tibetan language the Lamrim. So the purpose of the steps of the path of enlightenment, this tradition, is to engender mental happiness and well-being. So we have different ways of engendering happiness and well-being. If it actually gives rise to happiness and well-being in your mind, that's totally okay.
There is that the Tandangazuta Migi, Chedamambu, Luxumambu, Yazatanda Zochi, Lombanti, Demi Miriki, and Koransoki, Keshimbuji, Zediachi, Chigredos, Rodinza, and a Nanzu, same thing, and a Demi Miriglia, Kushib Goyati, Rachedangi, Mishenlia, and in Kushib Dang, Chendon, and in Shenlaya, and it's a those Samalo and Nambi Chug Nangi, Kitchishu Jilea, Kitchishu Jilea, Zigdos. How don't the draw Metzamayimba, Milli Shembig, and in Halu Shidala Sobanganzungus Tongu Mardinia, Tuzu Imbainea, P. Simji, Deva Devada, Dungam Devajilea, Zichini, and Tuzuina, Tuzulachi, Sembala Draya, dichina digaga marsi labchi and dizug samgam the tune chawa chigoras ro tinza mus bigi tachi demi and mirik to koran so kichimutse deadi nganzo lomba de leon tzoleya and chendong so de kushib chebana ti ngoyo netsugi sambu chaba chigrewas ra.
We have different people in our societies coming from different backgrounds, different traditions. Of course, one of the traditions existing here in Australia is of the traditional owners of the land, Aboriginal, First Nation. I don't know what's the most politically correct term to use, but anyway, it's really important from the bottom of our heart to have a sense of respect for people in general, but also for the traditional owners of the land, which is something that is considered to be important in the Buddhist tradition, an important value. Whoever we meet, whatever might be the person, we want to develop a sense of respect for that person, to value that person, to care for that person. This is such an important aspect within the Buddhist tradition, and it's not extended only to human beings, but also to other living beings, including those living beings that we might not be able to see, that we do not see with our eyes, that are not visible to us at the moment. But now we, in this tradition, the Buddhist tradition, we speak of gods and nagas and so forth. Even for them, we recognize that, like us, they want to be happy. They do not want to experience suffering or pain. So we acknowledge that. We consider that, and we also consider that there are different things that others might like or might dislike, things that cause them pleasure or displeasure. So in the way that we behave, we want to behave in a way that agrees with the dispositions of others, right? So the traditional owners of the land or other people, when we respect them, when we value them, this is in line with the code of conduct, the mode of behavior that we want to adopt from a Buddhist perspective, which is regarded as a good behavior, being a good-mannered human being.
These are the Sanjum Dendi Chuzul team by Naya, me Samcom Laya, Digituya, Tavlam the Nyachigres, the Yimba Dinza, Pega Dia Tavlam di two Samcom Laya, Shishane, Sonshaji, Tichagores, Dinzangan draw. Pigitachi draw ritus la war draw rituki samgam la ya kariore deva the dungam deva chikiri badi tanganzu mus tong to goras ra mus tong goras these are touching samba kibu yoya chet samba kibu yoya chet draw mi anita manchia karchi gors lavdi ani chik benjur loncho driviati ra Titola bezu shu shadi titon da deji pusum sobachi yungu yobar rewa gyamni ani penju dugu yobar da siburo asra da kashi pigi shenla ya nushu cheya chedi penju tindi chingi yo sigir deyne ya zo di ani chik susu kibu debu yongya chedo ani penju da tabshi chigi yoras tini tanda lo kashi ji kongla ya ani gyawarumu cheda lendu ani chik nushokbi ani tseriba ro Dindi mambu tsondu tsoni, ani rolling yunguyores. Kapchilaya, tatsu the manshu de arini leguresha. O dindi jilaya michigi teni pigi dom gyawandi. Tanda ari nalolaya domzi gyawandi. Mi gyacha dunchu sachi semgam madeva. Semgam kibu mebigi. Kangan chigi yobigi. Domzi teyores. Tinza ari shungi ani penju gyachangapchu thambadi semkam madivi trading chedu tango yoba nezu dindiji chayores o dindiji konyo yes ra
The gacha nachu.
Mid gyacha dunju saji semkam la yakanga the digi chedu penju di shung penju roson di gyachangapchu saji 딘딜레야 땅고요 샤지. 데덴바 가지마 하고 마스터라.
So we follow the teachings of the Buddha, the Bhagavan, and the teachings of the Buddha exclusively teach methods for developing happiness and well-being. And those methods are based on our mentality. So in seeking to develop happiness and well-being, our basis is working with the mind. So for the sake of developing happiness and well-being, for the sake of providing those methods for human beings or for other living beings, we first of all recognize that all of us as living beings, all of us are equal or the same in seeking happiness and well-being and wanting to avoid suffering and pain. And when we look at the things that we do in order to make that happen, we can say that we live at a time in which we focus primarily or sometimes only on external things, thinking that either money or possessions or wealth would be the thing that will cause us this excellent happiness and well-being. If we only had all those things that we seek, wealth, possessions, and so forth, we have the idea that they will give us perfect happiness. So looking at what we do on a day-to-day basis as human beings, we can see how we are so oriented towards thinking that those external things can provide us with perfect happiness and well-being. And some of us might go to the extent of even harming others in order to secure that happiness and well-being, or harming others in order to get what they want, in order to be to get happiness and well-being. But of course, it's not that everyone does that, but we still work on the assumption that, based on the assumption that all those things can provide us with perfect happiness and well-being. Now, for the last couple of decades, or even more than that, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been holding conferences and meetings with different scholars and academics from different parts of the world. And he's been working a lot mainly with American scholars, American scientists. And Geshe was listening to one of the reports that came out of one of those conferences. And there was one scientist that said that when they were running surveys in the US, they found that about 70% of the people reported mental unhappiness, being mentally unwell. And the number was so striking that the US government allocated a certain percentage of the budget. Geshe heard that it was 50%, but he doesn't know if this is true. And the number might not be correct, but anyway, decided to allocate some of the budget in order to address that mental unwellness, mental unhappiness.
통 투야래야 아니 직 벤저 가주스키 야진 조기업이 측이 델니비기 아니 미소야나야 제와사오 아니 남라사오 안 델템비기 직 샘감 마데바 용딩이 망부 용구여바디 페시 야지야레스 럽초로스 딘자 간지초디 아니 비기 샘레야 투데여바치 샘 박베부 샘 구양부 여바이나 벤줄 대점 매바이나야 직비리야 로 대부징한 대투여바다 아니 샘 고수도보다 샘 기부 매바이나 벤줄 가주스여바이나 벤줄 가주스여바이나야 아니 직 비기다 마기바진 대고야 직 딘디 연구여바다 대상 아주 통투고 그랬어.
So here in this tradition, we focus on mental development. For we can say that even if you have those great possessions, all those wealth and money and so forth, still often it causes your mind to become more busy, more fearful, more anxious, greater degree of unhappiness. So our happiness and well-being depends upon the mind rather than depending on those external things. If a mind can become vast and spacious, if it can become quiescent, then even if we don't have a lot of money, possessions, and so forth, our mind can still be well. Whereas even if you have all those desired things, those perfect conditions, if your mind cannot find this state of being vast and spacious, quiescent or relaxed, even if you have all those things, it does not mean to say that they will make you happy or well. So the point here is that we're focusing on the mind as a means for developing happiness and well-being and eliminating suffering and pain.
There's a dindige chambujil to the chick samgum the condas and debu so good do slayatiris. The samgum debu yonyak sam jonder di sam jonder sam jonder cheg that lavja things have di and number sangi that shon la yobadi that doesn't summon tongoras that are pig cheek seri by imbayana and delia tona chichene and yamshu chene trivatrilenchi seri by mambuch dansa kalaleores dansa kalale and kunzu colors and dansa kagi tawzulaya chiva kartan shabayana lem meva peshimundus yam samba shoes rashas kunzu di lagores pigilaya pig tanda pebigi pig tachi gom yamlen shukchimbu chedenge ani uti shukchimbu dindilaya ani tobu dindilaya ani lebalaya lok zugni takchi cheni ani kunzu trimje delaya ani leba shukchese karsa leba chese dindi tengu dos laboras.
So we look at our mind, we look at our mentality and assess how much well-being or happiness and well-being do we have. And we take up mental training. Now, in terms of the training that we take up mentally, of the most profound training that you can find is the one that are taught within the Buddhist tradition. And we can see that nowadays there are quite a few people that are doing research. They develop some interest to develop an research to look at the techniques, the methodology that you find within the Buddhist tradition in terms of developing mental happiness and well-being. Geshe, coming from one of the big monasteries in Tibetan society or community, have seen that there are teams of academics or people that do research about the mind, psychology, mental well-being that visit those monasteries, and they conduct interviews with the monks living in those monasteries regarding the working of the mind, what's happening to us on a mental level. And it seems that there is not even a single question, that cannot be answered. And particularly, there is also a research done that have been conducted on high-level meditators. Right. So amongst those, in those big monasteries, you also have those meditation experts. They've been doing some research in terms of measuring the brainwave, doing MRI scans and so forth. And actually finding in those researches sometimes are quite striking, looking at how certain areas in the brain can be highly developed during using certain meditation techniques.
Nishianjilaya Tommy Soroji, Seribagi Pigita, local level, Tajia, and Niton Peshe Shinga Trulera, Sergi Cambujores, Cambo 10 years, Los Angeles, Con Cambo Maki, Con Arilia, Jurimushuda, Con Lea Taji Chiresa, Con la Taji in the Timid Mixage Tenda, and Yawarmaji. And it pay new announcers. Thing is, we should the changes.
Geshe remembers that from the time that he was still living in India at Sera Monastery. One of the abbots of Sera Monastery was Lobsang Dönyu, who has lived in the US or spent a lot of time in the US, and around 2004 or 5 or 6, he participated in one of those researches where his brain was measured, brain waves or MRI, and the finding that they had in his scans, being a meditation master, were quite remarkable. So Geshe also remembered that it was done in participation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and it was quite striking.
딘디 인자다 간지 당한주 샘 소수기 샘 이야기 땅인데 대체슈 지그러 샘컴 지 비기 약부 추진 투바이나 아니 대화로 온니 대화디 되느라고였어요. 다 샘컴 아니 이 전단디 샘세디 율라야 뜨니 로 율다 냠도 드레지마 레마도 지 율라야 마덴 비기 아니 샘 로세지 샤요 마레스 티메디 율크 톨야 가츠스기 제바체토가 디츠기 아니 샘기 남주디 야지로 거레스 샘 쿠스토보 비기 다지 딘지기 샘 신줄로가 리디 아니 뇽르도야 아니 샘 드세르도야 딘디 용구요레스 딘디 송고레스 로 나마산지 쇼나야.
So we seek to improve the mind, to make it better as a way for developing happiness and well-being. And the mind depends upon objects. We cannot really speak about the mind without depending upon objects, the objects that the mind depends upon. So we cannot speak of the mind without speaking of what objects we choose in order to develop the mind. So then our mental development, of course, also depends upon the object that we choose for our mental training. And anyway, through that, we develop our mind. We can then reduce erroneous state of mind and develop or improve the clarity of our mind. This is what we deal with in the Buddhist tradition.
Yeah, the shil shabitone, teni anganzuda kazing samti, rod something magic shugins.
So having said that, Geshe would like now to go back to the text and pick up from the point that we left off in the previous session.
Samtere. Haran jikten de twen, nibanen haran jikten de twenir chuma mai bayola. Jikten chimi twen. Ninsi jendam yo kowatsam dun kiwa. Kosape de chimi twenir zushin. Jikten de shajon tsam dusun kiwa yimas. Kiw chongon tomon lamgi rambo lo jama she sinto sejdo. Til male sajdire.
Also invece di lo insere, ne anche lo
Lore. Andit.
anche lo dire.
Tiba di loss na dit.
Okay.
Ngal jiden dere tenye chuma mai ba yola jiden chimi ten ninsi jendam yo ko watson gyo te kosa pe di chimi tenye zu sonshin. Jigden de shajon zam de son kiwa yin la wen gen temba chigwe te chon de tembe de chao song lin ko punzo tamje le yi chok go ba song be chuji chebo kaji luda longjo so pusun so be wondo ni kowa yin be tela teni kiwa maris nyam tendo nyeje le nego dan tadu tendo nyeje ni le koyu lu soji punzo no chowa teni ki ya nego tendo nyer gode tende rumba gibale tar ngile toba chawa yimiche Lu longjon kor pusum soba ngondo kanyi tamji koyo diba mayindi lu la soba punzo tajaman zukudan di shingi jowadan din kor nami yimbichero tela gonin dode genle parsien tangbo shi lu longjo kor zomba punzo ki ngondo driba songshen shiong mambo ni tedagi kuzu driba sombe so kiyo chungundan tumelang lo jangwa she sendos.
So in the previous session, we have wrapped up this test of the path, which are shared with those of the small capacity. So today we're supposed to start with the test of the path of those of the medium capacity, but let's just read through the last section of the test of the path of those of the small scope. So we read through the measure of that attitude having arisen, an attitude of a small scope practitioner. So it says previously you had an uncontrolled interest in this life only, and your interest in future lives was just a vague understanding elicited by the words of others. Once the ranking have been switched so that future lives have become the main interest and this life nothing but a byproduct, the attitude of persons of lesser capacity has developed. As this nevertheless needs to be stabilized, you should strive to train in it even after it has arisen. Now, the section explaining the clearing up of misconceptions says the scriptures say that one must turn the mind away from all the advantages of cyclic existence. This has been the basis of some confusion. Some people may think it is improper to strive for a higher rebirth with an excellent body, wealth, and so forth, because those are parts of cyclic existence. In terms of what one should strive for, they are both temporary and ultimate goals. Even those who strive for liberation need to temporarily strive for good things within cyclic existence, such as an excellent body and so forth, since definite goodness is ultimately attained on the basis of a continuous succession of such lives. Not everything that is an excellent body, wealth, and retinue of a high state is included in cyclic existence, because the culmination of an excellent body and so forth is the form body of a Buddha, the wealth of his field and his retinue. It is with this intention that the ornament of the Mahayana Sutra says that the first 4 perfections accomplish the excellent body, excellent wealth, excellent retinue, and excellent undertaking of a higher state. Many scriptures explain that they accomplish the form body. This concludes the explanation of training the mind in states of the path shared in common with persons of lesser capacity.
Teni karyong gors da chedan kew dringi dan tomumi lamji rimba lo jama thile gores da di kawle ya chu ro di dangan chu chedangi ani kewa chimala ba jarchin she gores ine tsin di on the chebaina manzu metsichi le ya samda na metsichi ki namala ya chi tukub da masonna nenga chashu ji ki ta sumle goras dambo kiwi kaptuk ra kiwi kaptuk 직 되네야 다르지니 다직 소주다 메센 로담피 톨이야 아니 삼로 단투와니 진짜 직 벤저드단로 소베깔 딱 가둑 마무슈 직체 직인 거라 타마 게니 아니 수수수게 비리야 직 아니 감베갈라이 라마든 다 셴라 땡고베 카들 다 치갈하면 소리지 딘지 카들이야 아직 대두 참만년 바 슈쳔보지 용약 뒤수 딘지 소면 용거도 왔어라.
So that brings us to the next section of the text that explains the stages shared with persons of medium capacity. But before we go deeper into this section in the text, in general, now we're going to focus on things which you can say that the main priority would be future lives. Although the main priority in this section is what will occur to us in future lives, still, when we consider what occurs to us in this life, we can speak of 3 important periods. First of all, the initial period after our birth. Then the second period is when we grow up, we develop, we amass money, possessions, and so forth. And there are so many difficulties and complications that we go through in our life. And then the last part of our life, in which we grow old, physically we find it more difficult to do certain things, even to the point of, it's difficult for us, it can become physically difficult for us to rise up from bed. And we depend upon others in order to assist us in different tasks. So particularly at this point in our life, it seems that there is a great, you can say, disparity or unevenness in terms of the pleasurable experiences and the unpleasurable experiences that we go through.
당한 춘중 가기야 다지 많이 마 기비 갑두겠다 동아도서 당한 용니 로사와로지로스 텔야다 칼총이었나 텔라 디톨다지 마웅바 양게지 기와지 켈랭겨바나 다 딘디 마용에 톨야 고상로 땅야지 용거를 마도땅 이마 손슴바디 손슴바로스 테니다지 보고 춘중 가둘라야 고진 쯤어제라나 디데와지 마도 쇼지기 비기지 아니 차단 아니 원도 결세니 딘디 케요 말았다. 테니야 로타 다 주루주는 저기니 쟤는 테니다 아니 루캄 기온디 아니 텔레템비기다 지 아니 차단을 소비기 로제체 테니 지 단도 년경 세져라 단도리야데 년경야다 딘디 토네 아니 차월지 쇼온디 테니 베 아니 마기바다 참만지기다 동아 마음쇼 지용기어라스 다 뇽 땅야기 고급디다 단단가줄라 용거레스 데니탄 타마 수수수 감비가야 라마든 시안을 땡고 갑들야 다지 치갈함 동아지어라스 대야 마용야기 체도 대야 마용야기 체도 다당가주다 리버드니 아니 로자니 제단지 야시야다마 용기어레스 로 용기어레스 다디 니디 따로 딩니들야 리버드임바이나 덴데 교탄 투야기 레와지 요엔자 다디 톨야 아니 기원징기 삼바디 잘샤바이나 페시 야부로 지용사레스.
So then in looking at those 3 periods in our life, birth, then growing up and developing, and then the last period in our life when we get old, well, birth has already gone in a sense that there were suffering, there was pain being born from a mother womb, the first few years and so forth. We can think about the suffering or problems that we've experienced in that stage, but it's already gone. No, that stage in our life is already gone. Of course, we can think that we don't want to experience that again in the future, in the next rebirth. But anyway, when we at least think of this life, the things that we experience in this life, well, birth is already gone. Not only that, being a small child, mostly we might have been engrossed in different games or plays and so forth. And the type of anger or attachment that we have experienced is not like the one that we experience, let's say, now as being adults. Anyway, we grow up and develop, leading up to the second period in our life, becoming adolescents, 16, 17, 18 years old. And after that, our body develops. Then we have greater degrees of anger and attachment. They also take course in the type of relationships that we have with others. We oppose those that we see as enemies. We sustain and nourish those that we feel close to. And there are many suffering and problems that we experience throughout that long period in which we do certain things with relationships which are based on anger, attachment, and so forth. Then comes the last period in our life. As we said, we get old, and there are certain things that we find it difficult to do, even as far as just rising up or standing up by yourself without depending upon others. There also comes a time in which you find yourself being very close to death, being on the verge of death. So looking at the last 2 periods, living inside birth and the first few years that come after birth, being a small child, looking at, for example, where we are at the moment, and also looking at old age, there are some things that we can do in order to, we can become focused. There's some things that we can do in order to reduce the problems or the difficulties that we go through in those periods. So in some sense, you can say that there is some analogy that we can draw from looking at the steps of the path of the medium scope in thinking of what will occur to us in future lifetimes, to also looking at what will occur to us in a later stage of our life and becoming focused, making sure that we reduce suffering and pain, and we develop a greater degree of wellness.
Jandur Nyong Chechene, and it's Desha Shedang Gitolaya, Droshavayana, and it's Semba Magilolo Zigalaya, Semba Dingamdras Zigalaya, De Devayana, Tadi, Pendosiki Yomaros, the Kiwski Yomar, that Din Goyalaya, Cargores Laundi, the Kanang Jandur Nyong Dindi Chechene, the Kazus part of Kanalaya, Pingris, Kazus part of De Tugris, Lavana, the Ani. Tige samlotaya teacherya ani did noloya tether chewa jesu tempa dance ani shin ngandru sur sam de said ti tola chi jarbayna ra ta mila dugja chechini ani 세나면도 간지 단돈 연결 딘리 체진네 그냥 가주스 버드 니그리스 라바이나 수직 랍도 말아왔어 간스나 치와 톡도 봐봐 임바디 에 응원섬 러 단다 파르드 랑안즈 지딩 까와디 찬 단다 파르드 다 로사야 가주스 조여레 디린라야 수 데투여레 수칸 데투 메반자 나란조 디나싱 조기 임바 치와 템비 로직 여바이나 that didn't do that in good and do some sound. Tell it Tramutange, Yahu Chijavana, the Negab Lord Deva, Diungure, Tadu in a dig Peg your mother, Neagi, Gunsen Koreomar, Tinza, she was just chamber said, Nanga Dindiji Tony, some Chitan yourselves.
Particularly being young or being at the prime of your life, when your body is still strong. At this point, we sometimes tend to get involved in different situations in the relationships that we have with others. We have friends and we have enemies. We support our friends or the ones that are close to our heart, and we oppose our enemies. We act with ways which are involved with anger, attachment, and ignorance, and so forth. And what we need to do is to ask ourselves, does it make us happy? Our relationships which are based on anger and attachment, are they making us happy? Do they fulfill a purpose? Do they make us anxious? If we recognize that there is more unhappiness that is developed because of those relationships which are based on anger or attachment, if it makes us unhappy, if it gives us also this mental unease, if it makes us anxious, if we feel that there is no benefit to me in that, then we can think, why do I do that? Why do I need that? How does it help me? How long will I be able to continue in behaving like that and thinking that that will make me happy? So in that sense, it's similar to the way that the steps of the path of medium capacity has been set up. So again, looking at the beginning of this section, the stages shared with persons of medium capacity. It begins with saying that thus having recollected death and contemplated how you'll fall into the low rebirth after death. So rather than just thinking straight off of future lifetimes, again, Geshe said that we can also take this explanation and apply it to this lifetime. Thinking that, for example, how we live a life and the type of relationships that we have with others, if they are based or involved, if we are based on or involved with anger and attachment and so forth, if we have struggles with enemies and we try to keep those who are close to our heart close to us, and there we feel a sense of anxiety about it, unhappiness and so forth, we can think, how does it help me? What's the benefit that I get from that? Particularly, what will occur if death will come all of a sudden? If death will be followed upon me all of a sudden. And one thing that we can also think that looking at the passage of time, looking at a million years that have already gone by, can we find a single individual, a single person that was able to avoid death? So thinking about that no one can escape death, and that one day death will also befall upon us, then we can think, how then do I want to spend the rest of my life? Is it better to have this honest and genuine approach to others and avoid harming others? It's actually when we think that death will occur to us at some stage in our life, we can come to the conclusion that therefore actually behaving in a way that is detrimental to others, that is harmful to others, gives us no benefit. It's better to live a life in a way that is beneficial.
mi tachi dungar dan chiwa talked about said that konyo yo maravas ta danda dus power on the ge ta bed muzib dunga shuji legdos tinza chi 균땡기 치와 싸미야 되다 개침부 쇼인사레스 고랑아 디디지 딘디로지 라기도 생각하러 딩인 라오 쇼지 딩원에게 비기 따지 뒤균땡기 치와 템바세 디기 펜도지 통교로지 녜초르송스
Geshe has a friend and he sometimes has conversations with him, and Geshe's English is not that good. So Geshe reckons that probably 90% of the conversation is a guessing game, right? He has to guess what his friend is saying. But anyway, in guessing what his friend is saying, Geshe had a conversation with that person the other day, and he said that his father-in-law is getting older. Is becoming
the
Kimengi Papati father-in-law.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to make sure that I speak about the father of his wife, right? His father-in-law. His father-in-law is getting older, getting sicker. So he's getting to the stage just before death. So of course there is suffering. There's fear of death that comes up, and when he sees his father-in-law, it seems that there is unbearable suffering that he goes through. And it's told Geshe that actually now it really makes sense that you need to regularly be thinking of death, to remind yourself of death, in order to make sure that when you get to the point in which you get old and you find yourself on the verge of death, that there is not this unbearable suffering that arises in your mind. So really, this is something that we need to think of regularly. It is beneficial to think about that one day it will occur to us.
캔스를 자기여봐나 아니 그 내가 상마다나 그 뒤를 마법을 소리를 왔어 이내야 치위 고된디 치워 생긴디 규르 고된지라야 그 치위 고된 거마디 아니 치스라운디 메도르스라고 말 치스라운디 규르야지라야 고고 그랬어 그 규르 고된지 규르고 여봐지 임바이나 아니 규르디 아니 gyuwa 디피기 따지 란시 임바 딘디질이야 샘디 샤도바나 gyuwa 다 뜸비기 아니 상로 땅야 자와치야지 용구여서래서 kun 균르던 뜸비기 상로 땅토바나 데니 gyuwi 갑둘라야 믹세기 샘라야 강한 체치 마기바 용야디 뇽르 도고서래서
So we say that we need to think about death, but it might be that for the time being, just when you hear the word death, when you hear this discussion about death, it makes your mind unsettled. You become deflated, makes you depressed. So if this is the reaction that you get when you hear the word death, or when you hear about this topic, maybe for the time being, it's good not to think about it. But the purpose of thinking of death in this way is to recognize change. For death does not mean that everything ceases to exist, but death means transformation. Death means a change that is taking place. And change is a natural process. So if we think about death, we can also think of this natural process of changing or transformation that is unfolding. And if we can recognize this nature of change that is occurring, there would be less difficulties, less distress, less depression. Our mind would be less deflated if we can recognize that nature of change that we go through.
아니 지금 교만으로서는 딘디질이야 대야지 삼로 실샤니 내가 지고라스다 로 내가 지고다 디 내가 지에 대다 비기 수수 대단 님부디 라마투 디르와 라마투 디 드닝 안줄이야 강가 치고도 서로 딘저 큰 교화던 통바지 교화 로단디 약보지 심바이나 성루나 여바이나 코단 통바기 아니 차와치야 성로 땅단디 땡데 용고여서 디용바이나 테니코 가를 내바이나로 가를 내바이나 변한 안주 아니 니마시알 사르 론디 게 감라스 케모도스 니마 메바차 나곤 차와네 샘라야 감라스 믹스키 요마로스 게징 안주 딘디 짜원이니 아니 싱그 메바이네 홉드가라 니마 메바차 나곤 차와나 패싱 안주 템버터야 닌가 요로스 어 딘디로 저레스로
Geshe is not sure whether, no, so we speak about our grasping at permanence. Geshe is not sure that we are actually thinking that I'm impermanent, I'm stable or unchanging. Rather than thinking that I'm permanent or I'm really stable, we often think that we have a lot of time left for us in this life, that we have a lot of time. And all our plans or the way that we do different things in this life is based on that assumption that we still have a lot of time ahead of us. So we don't really understand the process of change that occurs to us in our life, and we don't really understand that life can come to an end quite quickly. So if we think of this nature of change, Geshe feels that we first of all would be able to recognize the nature of change that occurs all the time, so that a man would be more ready to deal with situations that we experience. So we will change the way that we behave, but we also will change the way that we think. It's just to give you an analogy of that, if we think of the nature of change that occurs as day by day in our life, we go through sunrises and sunsets and so forth, and we're used to that change, so we don't feel anxious or afraid of those changes. But think about this, try to imagine a situation where you had no idea of sunrise or sunset. So you live your day in sunlight, and all of a sudden the sun sets and it becomes dark, and you're not ready for that. How much fear or anxiety would arise in your mind in that situation if your mind is not used to thinking about it like that?
These are 2000 and in churches temple set, you know, Tabatembu mea somgi loti yobaina, Tigi and Suzulia penguosares, Tigi and Chava Duja chia, Chava Marav chia, Kanji Tamanti was chia, Tigi go mambu chick, and in churches temple tig, that dig cagores, Tangan drogore sambaina, and drogore sambaina, and it's there chedo. Chede mamuch loba chede mamuji ransing gagaras that me something in Jimban gagaras.
So in short, when we recognize that we are not stable, that we are not permanent, that we go through a process of change, this way of thinking is helpful. It is helpful because it also informs the way that we behave. It stops us from behaving in a negative way, in an ill-mannered way, in doing things which are not right. Just thinking that of that nature of change and that life is not stable will, and thinking of that one day we will meet at death, will cause us to look at the things that we do in our life and think that actually I don't need to get involved in such behavior. I don't need to do such and such, because death will catch up with me at some point.
Tirda, Jig did chewa tembulo mevaina, that Jig tend to deagi some lotroch, Shilashan, Legachavana, da, so di, and Karso, that Jig Penjur Lonjur Druiadi, Tig sort of Chagadosra. That Penjur Lonjur Druvni, any Degi Yonya said, Kabushoch, Luniton Trugi Kolaya, Temple Tuji Ching Sonyore. Telia Tabatembu Yomaris, Tenetic Turung our trouble Dumbicalia, Shuji Tigi, Lavjati, Zingon Nangens, Nayor de Inaya, Zambali Namalaya, Shuji, that Cap 2 Yomaras, Kamatu Galaya, that Turub 줍든 줍기 주고 뉴슈가리아 벤주슈치 mambu soyoras ra ta tandang azu teba na tan thongora benjo kazug shukches yoba teleya koleyan ganda do san jensem koleyan jendur chingi ro bena jakab ta chik benjo top chushi tuzu kabde ani kyarangi bigi ani torian disu na ngazug di shukches so islabchi ani benjo shukcheshi di ani bigi ani shemba toriak chet rozon tande go do samalo benjo sobal deni lebaras da benjo mampu chawan diteni drama de tenchi and drama de surgeon kanji zambli ani chuzo kashin torgona toriagi ani chagin le trende samalo benjo deni da sobar rawasra
Without thinking of death, this nothing of death will act as a basis of whatever we do in this life, the lack of recognition of death. And Geshe reckons that when you fail to recognize your own death, it is likely that you will be more oriented towards doing things in order to increase your money, your wealth, and so forth, to get as much as you can. And really, can it give you happiness and well-being? The Buddha said 2,600 years ago that if we only focus on possessions, wealth, and so forth, it will not give us the happiness and well-being that we seek. And other masters that came after that were holding the teachings that the Buddha gave in the 5th, 6th, and 7th centuries gave a similar advice. But still, this advice did not become the most prevalent view in the world. Then in the 7th, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century, we can see that when we look at the passage of the recent centuries, we can see that we are getting, you can say, wealthy and more wealthy, richer and richer, more possessions around the world. But does it really give us, living beings living in this world, this happiness and well-being that we seek? Actually, Geshe reckons that when you look at the relationship between wealth and this thought of how you want to outdo your enemies or your rivals and so forth, particularly looking at international politics at the moment, right? So you have those countries that are rich, which want to who want to do better than other countries. So the sense of competitiveness then causes some countries to develop arsenals of weapons or other means in order to destroy their rivals. It seems that actually sometimes, rather than thinking that with money and wealth and so forth, you can reach that state in which you're happy and well and so forth, it seems that it actually, at the present, it increases this negative competitiveness, competitive vibe that causes people to want to destroy their rivals.
어딘도래 당한주다 센시로 직 라바야나다 카드 땅고 말데이냐 베나다 텐상기 찰려다 베나 야나 로지 바나다 벤주 슈치 소고라스 티치온디다 디 갑딜이야 다 아니 롱바 톱친 싱아지베 쪽직들이 야나 갑딜이야 하는 걸세 드는게 딘디 코스 직지나 인기 말스 직지나 인시그스 베나 아리지 오스트레일리아 야가리 유럽까지 직도서 콘주츠 초드니 야나 직배 갑디자 투에 간선 댄섬 리고라스 단 댄섬 리고라스라.
So not thinking of death, not being mindful of death causes us to behave like that. So like, for example, looking at contemporary politics, and here Geshe is not wanting to be too critical, but when you look at, for example, the situation between China and other countries, so China in recent times is becoming more and more wealthy. So now we have a few other countries coming together, the US, Australia, other countries in Europe and so forth, wanting to join together in order to overpower China. Again, when you think about it, kind of how money and so forth plays a part in the wish to outdo your opponents.
나로라야 피다지 벤저체도 나로라야 슈그베 큰진 첨부 남자 첨부 슈치라 penju shu yor de ne din nansing gi penju yo nansing gi penju thame ba yo nansing gi ngamra thame ba ke chin de go ya ne dan chi yaja ya dam cha go ka ya mengi ji ba na ka ya mengi ji ba na ka wa de ne ya he shi chin ro to ba nam do ka ya mo go to ni sem ba he shi chin ro tu ya yaja ya dam yin go ra ti da
the Gala kake menge de mi pango de mambo na konso sheshi de
shi de go dojo na pe di ani konzo tse mo tse ani bogre jiti drej sa shi de go re nganzu chunju gala ro tan jobe lo mo khan yo maro penju pe gyu ro ta gonda chaon di ani chama pi pang gala ru chi ani tse mo tse she chap de go
rene de gala de pango mambo yo de pena doji de de so boto ina de le shishi chi pangmido
ta di khan sin de pi pe sha tengi ji le ro o dinti gi ta konzo di jini konzo ngamra lang da patient in consulted mother and their one process care.
Anyway, Geshe said that also internally, if you kind of sometimes if you're very wealthy, there's a sense of anxiety that arises in your mind. There's a sense of resentment towards those that are your peers or those that are doing as well as you. You want to do better than them. Sometimes it seems that you might have countless things and commensurate with that, the degree of anxiety and resentment would also be countless or immeasurable. Whereas if you had nothing whatsoever, you could just be happy and relaxed wherever you are. So kind of I challenged that statement of Geshe and said, well, kind of you go to different places and you see that actually beggars and so forth are not really living happily and kind of in a relaxed way. Well, Geshe said that in Tibet, for example, where he comes from a family of nomads and they were quite poor. You finish a day of work, all the animals come back home, then kind of you go out with your family outside to the meadow, you're happy and so forth, even if you don't have all those possessions and money and so forth, still continuing it set up, but not having that does not necessarily mean that you can live happily and so forth, because for those of us who've been to India, for example, we've been to places like Budgaya, you see crowds of beggars and so forth that don't seem to be that happy in their life, right? So it's not necessarily that not being wealthy will give you happiness. And Geshe said that, yeah, but you know, it's kind of this in those situations. You have to look at the situation. You know, when you have someone that is giving money, of course, you know, if there's a certain expectation to get money, then this whole scenario is set up where you have people fighting over money and so forth. But in general, Geshe reckons that if you have no expectations and you can get by on less and be satisfied with that, then the mind indeed will be made happier.
The thing is, some that is the shong nalo was your martas, yes, some danda, and it been that and the charang tesha there, been doji de la sovi. And a pango jata mambu yor then, the dinala ya pig same shim, samba shimchi, same nasa yor de you. The subo the tabja shuch, and kamba make you, lapa make you, me make you your day in the yajik. Mun roding same shini. Samba shimchi, Ranshi Gavding, Yoda Yoras in a Titsugi, Pilayachi, Titsugi, Mang Rojiki, Thomasons.
Takrande Hauma.
Yeah, just a near some to Shevara.
Then some sort the Tadi Shimchuchen Chevoro, some sort of asked join.
It's okay, not okay. Sorry. Yeah.
All right. Anyway, I was having a bit of domestic with Geshe. He said like no, in India, for instance, I mentioned kind of, for example, beggars in India did not seem to be that happy or peaceful. Well, I guess I said, of course, you have situations where someone, someone's mind might be unwell, mental sickness, mental illness, physically they might be unwell. Actually, when you look at situation of some beggars in India where they have physical impairments or disabilities and so forth, some of the situations are quite strong. And Geshe Tsultrim here is expressing his opinion, and he says that he doesn't think that there is higher suicide rate. And I said, well, do you have the numbers? Like, can you support it with numbers, with data? And Geshe said, well, he's here expressing his opinion.
Or did that? I think my too much talking. This is my karma.
Sorry. I'm just here to help you.
Then the log saying that's right. Tanjik then lo ni chimmy then routine kid. Camdron Tumawada, Kanaki lending Yibukone, Digvat Pong, Gava Drabal and Baby, then you compound to Meja. Then it had some Chover Menzinki. Give Chungan Tomo with somebody Gavata, Jean than Tomo and Coantadala, Shambalo with somebody Jenny. Tella, then it chanchu the same kid, give chamber Trigby, give drink somebody jango, then the Delhami compound Tojan, usually Dongale Mandebe. Tela rangi ji devan zamba shinju loyembe yantavana deva mela haya ngandrong ibotoe tangembi cheros.
Anyway, apologies for that. Let's go back to the text. So looking at the stages of the path of those of the medium capacity begins with training in mind in the stages of the path shared in common with persons of medium capacity. Thus, having recollected death and contemplated how you fall into the low rebirths after death, you turn your mind away from this world and strive for fortunate rebirths. Then you give up bad actions through the common refuge practice and through ascertaining virtuous and non-virtuous actions and their effects. By then putting effort into accomplishing virtue, you will indeed attain the state of the fortunate rebirths. However, that is not considered sufficient here. Rather, after you develop the attitude common to persons of lesser capacity, you develop the attitude common to persons of medium capacity, which counteracts adherence to cyclic existence as a whole. Based on that, you will develop bodhicitta and be led onto the path of persons of great capacity.
This.
Then it says, based on that, you develop bodhicitta and will be led to the path of persons of great capacity. Therefore, training the attitude common to persons of medium capacity.
Oh, did it that di so did it that Karswada Pig some lot the Yabuch Tamadna and Pusutovuchaya, Pusutovuchawena, Kotamandi Vayonga ko chunyi inza ani kuyang's chegoyati ani kuyang's chia and chikpi this song does.
Anyway, without thinking about it, without thinking of death and such, you might find yourself in a situation where you feel uptight or stressed. Your mind will be unwell and you'll not be able to find relaxation.
There's that deal ya comdijing never na dini dangan zu pi kabdu la ya johatan se di ranjin suena da kabur was ra deal ya comdiji tento ba na and this chicken jodro ya da rewa yungu yoras ra.
So then if we expect immediate changes to take place, it is likely not to happen. Change will come through increasingly habituating yourself with something different.
Tene da dilaya camdro tumoada said. That did it. The camdro said ge tanjing da meseda mazuna da goshe gyachin tama pi tachu susu kambe ganlaya lama to be kabdulaya. Ani teni karswata semte sadroji ke me ani kyonanda ani ngamda da tinji 용이 갑둘이야. 지 겸루 생이 되어봐야나. 아니 자자자 담봤더니 샘 때서서로 라기어레스. 디기 팬도인 거레스로. 먼저 지 가에 샘 때서로 좀 매봐야나. 데니페 아니 샘드 마슈 홍로야지. 비글이야 레와치사다 이치치사 지겨봐야나. 아니 디 최기 로 데부친 대야지 용거르 딘자 디 돈이다. 아니 조 돈이 겸로디 직송거도스.
Now, also the section mentioned having a common refuge. So thinking of refuge that is common also to this stage of the path, particularly when we think of situations where we find that there's nothing or no one that we can rely upon. We might find ourselves in a certain difficult situation, and we might feel that there's nowhere that I can turn to, nothing that I can trust. So in thinking of going for refuge, common refuge, then if there's something that we can entrust a mind to and find certain trust in that thing, Geshe feels that at least in that difficult situation, a mind can become better or more comfortable.
데레다 다 직접 룰이야 로칸르지 테고레스 라운디 겨유 넘버 숨송데데 산지추 겐든숨 디 다지 아니 코와당강 송기 동할데 겹 통에디 직겨유 건조숨을 여바디 겨유 건조숨부터니 아니 지 코와당강 송기 동할레 간지 참만디비 갑둘이야 로초사디 디숨 코나이 마도 아니 셴방아 야 직수칸이야 직 레바다 이치치사지 매 삼성기 뒤균댕기 삼로 지겨봐나 아니 소소 카드로 카데나야 로 데부더치 디 용구여서레스.
So thinking of the common refuge that is mentioned in this section, common refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. So when you then think of what will occur to you in future lifetimes, falling to a miserable state of rebirth due to the force of actions that you have done before, not avoiding negative actions and so forth, thinking of the suffering or the pain that might arise in those state of existence, you might think, what can I rely upon? To what should I turn my mind to? So here it says, then give up bad actions through the common refuge practice, refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And in turning our minds toward refuge, finding a sense of trust, of refuge in the Buddha and Dhamma and Sangha, we can develop also a sense of trust that through doing that, we can avoid future suffering. All right, did I choose to?
Yeah.
All right, so we might leave the text here for today. Alan asked a question. Could Geshe explain the possibilities between karmic seed and the seeds of the afflictions? Dila legi pacha da nyomongi pacha dini la mukatsuyonas.
무슨이었어레스. 다다바든 기침에도 무슨이었어레스. 레 바자인라 아니 뉴몬비 바자 마인 바치 요레스. 다 뉴몬비 바자는 레 바자인 거그레스. 근데 니가 마인 바 요르와스라. 다 레 뉴몬 바자인라 레 바자 마인 바치 요 마레스.
Some moshiro.
무슨 아니 무시레. 레 바자인라 뉴몬비 바자 마인 바 유무비 바샤인라 레그 바샤 많이 바지 요마다. This is 무슨 yeah.
Now, Geshe reckons that there are three possibilities between karmic imprints and seeds of the afflictions, or karmic seeds and seeds of the afflictions. Actually, Geshe hasn't thought of this question before, so just now kind of thinking about it in relation to Alan's question. You can find something that is a karmic seed, but not seed of the afflictions. Geshe reckons that if it's a seed of an affliction, it's also a karmic seed. And you can also find something that is neither a karmic seed nor seeds of the afflictions.
Reda nyumung be pacha sedi nyumung gi juchine pacha dlewarta samlo nyumung di lojiros ta lo di gi konelane abigi ta nyuba shaundi ane le chiglaya ma tembar chawa chiglaya ma tembar sawni ne drosa menza nyumung be pacha yinke leg pacha maiba sejik yungyo mares ta yo mares ro.
So then when we think of the imprints for the afflictions, right? So there are certain potentials for the afflictions. Now, in terms of the afflictions, you cannot find really an affliction that is not related in some sense to actions that we take. And therefore, Geshe reckons that an imprint for the affliction is also a seed for karma.
Gewi lem bashi nyumula madem pa pena nyinji da chanju sem le soba kulong tim bashi le teni ani gewi le sagba yoros di paja du nyumula tensi ki lago maros ra.
Now, if you think of a karmic seed which is not an imprint of the affliction, think about, for example, virtues, seeds of virtues. Right, so virtues which are not associated with the afflictions. So you can have virtues for actions. Sorry, you can have seeds or imprints, have seeds for actions which are virtues, which are not involved with the afflictions. So this is this option of something that is a karmic seed, but is not an imprint of the affliction.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's leave it here for now. So we'll finish off with the final Lamrim dedication. For my two collections, vast space that have amassed from working with effort at this practice for a great length of time, may I become the chief leading Buddha for all those whose minds, wisdom, eyes blinded by ignorance. Even if you do not reach this state, may I be held in your loving compassion for all lives, Manjushri. May I find the best of complete parts of the teachings, and may I please all the Buddhas by my practice. Using skillful means strong but a strong force of compassion, may I clear the darkness from the minds of all beings with the points of the path as I've discerned them. May I uphold Buddha's teachings for a very long time. With my heart growing up with great compassion, in whatever direction the most precious teachings have not yet spread, or once spread have declined, may I reveal this treasure of happiness in me. May the minds of those who wish for liberation be granted bounteous peace, and the Buddha's deeds be nourished for a long time, by even discredited path to enlightenment, completed due to the wondrous virtuous conduct of the Buddhas and their sons. May all humans and non-human beings who eliminate adversity and create conducive conditions for practicing the excellent paths, never departed in any of the lives from the purest path praised by the Buddhas. Whenever someone makes effort to act in accordance with the tenfold Mahayana virtues practices, may you always be assisted by the mighty ones, and may oceans of prosperity spread everywhere.